Final Fantasy XVI has just recently released a brand new trailer, and with it, a ton of new information. Today we are going to break down every single detail, so please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and if you're already subscribed, hit the like button as it helps us with the algorithm. And with that, let's hop into it. The trailer opens with a shot of a book, and uses it to tell the story of the world and its politics. The framing of this shot is very similar to that of the memoirs of Count Edmont in Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward, the project that most of the key staff members were working on before this game. This likely seems like a reference to Heavensward. The narrator then mentions that it's been 1500 years since the fall of their forebears. The camera then shows ruins of what looks way more advanced than the current medieval style of architecture. It's hard to make out exactly, but Yoshi P has confirmed that there was a high-tech civilization on Valistia 1500 years ago. This is undoubtedly a reference to the same group of people. For those of you who played Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward, again, a game that is said to be very influential on this one, this high-tech civilization bears a striking resemblance to the Allegan Empire, a high-tech ancient civilization that also fell. Whatever was the consequence of that civilization falling, it's implied that now Valistia is dying as a result. In the next few shots, we see a barren wasteland, which, as described by one of Clive's comrades here, is devoid of any life. The blight has sucked the land dry. As a result, there are no trees and few life forms for miles. As for how the blight seems to be draining the ether from the land, it's unknown. This is a similar concept to Final Fantasy XIV, where in that universe, it's actually the summoning of icons that can blight the land, draining the ether from the surrounding environment in order to sustain its physical manifestation, though it's unknown how exactly that mechanic will play out here. This scene also connects back to the very first scene of the very first trailer, when they got word that the target was Shiva's dominant. And in fact, you can see that Clive is wearing the same armor set. You can note that Jill is on the back of this unidentified man here. The man walking in the front here, giving the exposition, is none other than the dominant of Rama, or Ramu, depending on how you want to pronounce it. He's also rumored to be this game's Cid. When the camera pans overhead, you can also see that Clive's wolf dog Torgal is alive and well. Though he was a pup in the first trailer, he's now a full-grown dog, or wolf, whichever. We also get this shot here, and it's hard to make out exactly what this is supposed to be. However, it's what the narrator's saying here I find to be a bit more important. She says that darkness is spreading as day gives way to night. This sounds pretty similar to the Star Scourge of Final Fantasy XV, where eventually they no longer receive sunlight at all. Then the trailer goes into the different kingdoms, and Sambrek is one I find rather interesting, because in the trailer it's described that their ambition is divine, and the name of the trailer is the Ambition Trailer. Sambrek also is the home of Dion, Bahamut's dominant, and just purely by Final Fantasy logic, this would mean that they are in endgame territory. Doesn't help that they also are the ones with the holy depiction behind their king. That is definitely some JRPG villain. Not to mention that Sambrek is French. This is also likely a reference to Ishgard, which is loaded with French culture. Again, if you haven't played Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward, there is a lot of inspiration from that story and that game in here. And on top of all of that, aesthetically, it just reminds me of Ishgard. Much like Ishgard, they also have dragoons. Does this king here have similar ambitions to God King Thornton? I would say it's pretty likely. Sambrek King also wants the Imperial flag to fly over every city and storm, and says that they will all bow before their emperor. Do I think he's the main villain? Nah, no way. But he is going to be a notable side antagonist, and probably the game's secondary villain before they reveal who the real bad guy is. The Iron Kingdom is also really interesting, forged in faith and fear. He also mentions souls being stained with ether, and cleansing them of their corruption. I'm not entirely sure why, but it kind of reminds me of tempering from Final Fantasy XIV. Tempering in 14 is described as a state of iconic corruption, where the Allegans, who refer to primals as icons, just as they refer to them as icons in FF16, causes people to become enthralled by the god, which gives them a fervent desire to forcibly convert others to worship. But all that is just speculation for the moment. With Lalud, it is yet again mentioned by Barnabas that the Dark Swallows moor more of the realm each day. It almost makes you wonder if a world of ruin for Final Fantasy XVI is going to be a thing. This scene yet again connects back to the scene from the Dominance trailer, in which it seems that Barnabas was not only being Odin's dominant. Using the M rating to its fullest, this is the most explicit that Final Fantasy has ever been about it. Personally, I think it's neat. In the subsequent scene, you can see Barnabas standing at what appears to be the bottom of the sea, with the sea parted in half, perhaps even being a biblical reference. This wouldn't be too surprising, as Barnabas's name itself is a biblical reference. It's also worth noting that we know Leviathan is in this game, we just haven't seen him yet, and this parting of the sea could definitely connect back to Leviathan's dominant. It's also worth noting that in the character bio on the website, it says that good old Barney here came from the seas, and it's implied that he kind of just washed ashore one day as a quote, landless, titleless wanderer. So this guy just kind of came out of the ocean and eventually became the leader of a country. His full name, Barnabas Tharmer, loosely translates to encouraging horse rider, and indeed, when he transforms into Odin, that's more or less what he does. The last thing to note about this scene is that you can see some sort of sunken ship as well, although it's hard to note if that's just a detail that they put at the bottom of the sea or if that's going to play a role in the story. It's noted that in the year 860, the Imperial Army invades, but at the beginning of this trailer we find out that it's been 1500 years since the previous society fell. What I think is going on here is something like BC and AD, where the number of years was reset to note a new era in history. The collapse of civilization and resetting humanity back to a medieval time would certainly be a strong enough occasion to note such a thing. But even then, there's about 640 years between then and the current timeline. I don't think there is any time shenanigans going on here, but we'll only know for sure once we get more of the lore. And right here, you can see the same guy who kills the Archduke is wearing the same national colors. This implies that there is an entire conspiracy, a betrayal here to assassinate the Archduke. And then a brand new Ascian shows up. Is this man Pepe Sylvia? That is to say, is he the other dominant of Ifrit? That might be a question for Jacob, but I think it might be. From the cut of the trailer, it seems like he's the one who transforms into Ifrit. And the narrator says, "From the slaughter will a new shadow arise, to fall upon the dominants, painting their destinies black as night," followed by this transformation. If I had to take a stab on who the main villain of this story is, my money is currently on him. He's also hooded for a reason, and typically this trope means that we've seen this character's face before, or less often but still possible is that they're saving that character's face for a dramatic reveal. However, I think it's the former and that it's a face that we've seen before, and I have a weird feeling that it might be Clive's face under there. It's here that the narrator is revealed to be Jill, when she says, "And so I became their puppet." This scene again goes back to the first trailer. They also seem to have some children here as prisoners of some sort. Next we see an arm that appears to be turning gray. This arm no doubt belongs to Ramuh's dominant. This is the price of being a dominant and hosting an icon in your body. Thanks to a translation from @ITaiKimochi, we actually know a little bit more about this thanks to what was said in the Japanese trailer that didn't make it into the English cut. Jill says what awaits the fate of the dominant is that they turn to stone, and that she wonders if that's akin to death as she's been used as a weapon all her life. This is going to be a brutal story, and I kind of doubt everyone will make it out alive. You can see one such man who's turned almost completely to stone laying in this bed here. Is this a dominant? Or perhaps is this a man suffering from the so-called blight? Furthermore, it's been discovered that there's a particular frame here where you can see Clive and Jill standing together. It is really dark and brightness has to be bumped up to the absolute max, but this confirms the speculation I had that there was a scene in the Dominance trailer where Clive was fighting and Jill was a party member. It was a very non-obvious shot, but if you looked closely enough, it seemed to be the case. Yet again, we see that dominants can partially transform into their icon counterparts, with Benedicta here growing Garuda's wings and using her claws. This is an insanely well choreographed scene. We also see this again with Jill partially transforming into Shiva. The big question here is that since Jill will be one of our AI party members, is this from a scene in which she's accompanying us? We also see Rama's dominant fighting against Benedicta. Is it possible that he comes to interrupt the fight with her and Clive? Though he isn't shown later when she fully transforms, so it's hard to to fully say at this point. Then we have the gameplay, and this is something that I've analyzed at length previously. While things mostly look the same, there are a couple of changes that I think are worth pointing out. The first is that the limit break bar has changed. The first time we saw it, it was 3 evenly spaced gold bars, the exact same way it looks in Final Fantasy XIV. But now there's one really long bar followed by 2 shorter bars, and we assume this is the limit break gauge because it looks the same as Final Fantasy XIV's. But in full honesty, we don't quite know that yet. Also, you'll notice these materia-like colored dots in the bottom right corner. Their color coding seems to correlate to icons. It's hard to say from this footage exactly what they're for, but I think they're to keep track of your cooldowns. Reminds me of how some FF14 players will display their expanded hotbar, so that they can use them the moment they're ready. This confirms that there will be humanoid-sized fights with the Dominants, as well as fighting them in their full forms. In the next scene where Clive is fighting Garuda, you can see Clive using a counter stance called Heat Wave, which allows you to not only counterattack, but then send a fire-based blade beam back at your opponent. This is a very cool looking move. Then we have this massive fight with Odin. You can notice that Clive is performing an air dash by using Shiva's cape, allowing him to stay in the air longer and dodge the incoming attack. Judging by the press motion of the icon, this seems to be triggered by pressing Cold Snap while in the air. While the button inputs are much more similar to Dragon's Dogma, it seems that the icons themselves are much more similar to styles, and you'll be switching back and forth between those styles actively while playing. You can also see a short clip of Ifrit fighting Bahamut. There's not much revealed here, however you can see Bahamut's icon now. Next you'll see what appears to be adult Jill fighting Odin, but on closer inspection that's not actually what's happening. When you carefully look at the lighting, it seems that these are actually 2 different places. As for who these characters are actually fighting, it remains to be seen. And at this frame you can get a good look at Rama's Dominant. Again, this guy is rumored to be the Cid of Final Fantasy XVI. I think he might be the most handsome Cid in the franchise. Then there's this frame here, and the credit goes to @DreamBoem on Twitter for this observation. If you look carefully, Clive's face tattoo is gone. And if you look even more carefully than that, there seems to be another scar on his face. It kind of seems like a burn mark. This implies that Clive would rather burn his face than have a mark placed there by his slave owners, which holy giga chad. This is the type of stuff I'm most looking forward to with Final Fantasy XVI. Then there's this painting at the end. Now this painting has a lot of implications, and honestly this painting will probably be a video on its own right, because there's so many theories, so many layers here. Shout out to @Schrodinger's Baby Seal for posting the full image here so that we can look at it much more clearly. The icons all have halos over their heads, and I also don't really see Ifrit or Phoenix in this artwork. However, it is really notable that Leviathan is here. We haven't even seen Leviathan yet. My hunch is that we meet Leviathan's Dominant very late into the game. The creature at the very top is likely the god of icons. Some people say that this thing looks like Safer Sephiroth, and I'm not inclined to disagree. Obviously it's not, but it does bear some resemblance. Other people have said that it looks like FF12's version of Ultima. We'll be discussing this a lot in the near future, but for right now, just know that I have many theories. Also, hey guys, I am actually adding this in post while editing, but now that we know what Barnabas's voice sounds like, if you go back to the Dominance trailer and you listen to this line in particular.
I unite the Dominants, that we may bring an end to the strife, and found a new order to see us unto tomorrow.
You can tell that that is in fact Barnabas, and that's going to be a very important line later on. So I just wanted to cut into this video and let you guys know that. Shout out to patron Josie J and the rest of the Ultima community.